A panic broke out, and the tremor spread through the whole Reich. Abruptly, the mark plunged down, never to stop until it had reached the fantastic figures of madness. The millions, the billions, and trillions. Now the real witch's Sabbath of inflation started. To describe it in detail with its incredibilities would take a whole book, and to readers of today it would seem like a fairy tale. I have known days when I had to pay 50,000 marks for a newspaper in the morning and 100,000 in the evening. Whoever had foreign currency to exchange did so from hour to hour, because at 4 o'clock he would get a better rate than at 3, and at 5 o'clock he would get much more than he had got an hour earlier. For instance, I sent a manuscript to my publisher on which I had worked for a year. To be on the safe side, I asked for an advance payment of royalties on 10,000 copies. By the time the check was deposited, it hardly paid the postage I had put on the parcel a week before. On streetcars, one paid in millions. Trucks carried the paper money from the Reichsbank to the other banks, and a fortnight later, one found 100,000 mark notes in the gutter. A beggar had thrown them away contemptuously. A pair of shoelaces cost more than a shoe had once cost. No more than a fashionable store with 2,000 pairs of shoes had cost before. To repair a broken window cost more than the whole house had formerly cost. A book more than the printer's shop with 100 presses. For $100, one could buy rows of 6-story houses on Kurfürstendamm, and factories were to be had for the old equivalent of a wheelbarrow. Some adolescent boys who had found a case of soap forgotten in the harbor disported themselves for months in cars and lived like kings, selling a cake every day, while their parents, formerly well-to-do, slunk about like beggars. Messenger boys established foreign exchange businesses and speculated in currencies of all lands. Towering over all of them was the gigantic figure of the super-profiteer Stennis. Expanding his credit, and in thus exploiting the mark, he bought whatever was for sale: coal mines and ships, factories and stocks, castles and country estates, actually for nothing, because every payment, every promise became equal to naught. Soon a quarter of Germany was in his hands, and perversely the masses, who in Germany always become intoxicated at a success that they can see with their eyes, cheered him as a genius. The unemployed stood around by the thousands and shook their fists at the profiteers and foreigners in their luxurious cars, who bought whole rows of streets like a box of matches. Everyone who could read and write traded, speculated, and profited, and had a secret sense that they were deceiving themselves, and were being deceived by a hidden force which brought about this chaos deliberately in order to liberate the state from its debts and obligations. I have a pretty thorough knowledge of history, but never to my recollection has it produced such madness in such gigantic proportions. All values were changed, and not only material ones. The laws of the state were flouted. No tradition, no moral code was respected. Berlin was transformed into the Babylon of the world. Bars, amusement parks, honky-tonks sprang up like mushrooms. What we had seen in Austria proved to be just a mild and shy prologue to this witch's Sabbath, for the Germans introduced all their vehemence and methodical organization into the perversion. Along the entire Kurfürstendamm, powdered and rouged young men sauntered, and they were not all professionals. Every high school boy wanted to earn some money, and in the dimly lit bars, one might see government officials and men of the world of finance tenderly courting drunken sailors without any shame. Even the Rome of Suetonius had never known such orgies as the pervert balls of Berlin, where hundreds of men costumed as women and hundreds of women as men danced under the benevolent eyes of the police. In the collapse of all values, a kind of madness, gained hold particularly in the bourgeois circles, which until then had been unshakable in their probity. Young girls bragged proudly of their perversion. To be 16 and still under suspicion of virginity would have been considered a disgrace in any school of Berlin at that time. Every girl wanted to be able to tell of her adventures, and the more exotic, the better. But the most revolting thing about this pathetic eroticism was its spuriousness. At bottom, the orgiastic period which broke out in Germany simultaneously with the inflation was nothing more than feverish imitation. One could see that these girls of the decent middle-class families much rather would have worn their hair in a simple arrangement than in a sleek man's haircut, that they would much rather have eaten apple pie with whipped cream than drink strong liquor. Everywhere it was unmistakable that this over-excitation was unbearable for the people. This being stretched daily on the rack of inflation, and that the whole nation, tired of war, actually only longed for order, quiet, and a little security in bourgeois life, and secretly it hated the Republic, not because it suppressed this wild freedom, but on the contrary because it held the reins too loosely. Nothing embittered the German people so much. It is important to remember this. Nothing made them so furious with hate and so ripe for Hitler as inflation.